"I can serve you if you spare my life,"
Please don't do
said the
this.
hungry Apache woman after
I
stealing
beg
from his
you.
garden. The sun had not fully risen yet, but the land was already awake. The dry ground stretched far and wide, cracked like old skin that had not tasted rain in a long time. Small bushes struggled to stay green, and the air carried dust instead of hope. In this harsh land lived a woman named Nita. She was Apache, thin from hunger, and tired in a way that went deeper than the body. Hunger had become her daily companion, and fear walked beside her like a shadow. Nita had not always lived like this. Once she had a family, a small camp, laughter at night, and food shared around a fire. But drought had come, slow and cruel. Animals moved away. Crops failed. Illness followed hunger, and one by one the people she loved were taken from her life. When she was finally alone, the land felt larger and colder than ever before. For days she had eaten almost nothing. A few roots, some leaves, water that tasted of dust. Her body felt weak, but her will to live was still strong. That will pushed her forward even when her legs trembled. She walked long distances each day, hoping to find something, anything, that could keep her alive for one more night. On the edge of the land stood a small garden. It was not large, but to someone like Nita, it looked like a miracle. Green plants rose from the soil, protected by a simple wooden fence. Vegetables grew there, alive and healthy, as if the drought had forgotten this small place. Nita had seen gardens before, but never one so full when everything else was dying. She watched the garden from a distance for a long time. She knew it belonged to a settler, a man who lived alone in a small wooden house nearby. She had seen smoke rise from his chimney before. She knew going closer was dangerous. If she was caught, there could be serious trouble. But hunger speaks louder than fear when it becomes too strong to ignore. That morning her stomach burned with pain. Her hands shook. Her thoughts became slow and heavy. She knew that if she did not eat soon, she might not survive much longer. The garden was her last hope. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for forgiveness, but for strength. Moving slowly, she approached the fence. Every sound felt loud to her ears, the wind, her own breathing, the soft step of her feet on dry soil. She waited, listening. Everything was quiet. The house door was closed. No movement, no voices. With effort, she climbed over the fence, careful not to break anything. Her heart beat fast. She knelt near the plants, touching the leaves gently, almost with respect. She did not want to take more than she needed. She reached for a few vegetables, pulling them from the soil with care. The smell of fresh earth filled her nose, and tears gathered in her eyes. It had been so long since she had seen food like this. She worked quickly but calmly, placing the vegetables in a small cloth she carried. Her hands moved with practice, shaped by years of living close to the land. For a moment she felt almost normal again, like a woman providing for herself, not a desperate soul stealing to survive. Then she heard a sound behind her. It was not loud, but it was enough. A step. A breath, a presence. Nita froze. Slowly she turned her head. A man stood a short distance away, watching her. He was tall, with a weathered face and tired eyes. His clothes were simple, worn from work in the sun. This was Thomas Hale, the owner of the garden. He had come out early to check his crops, hoping to protect what little he had managed to grow during the drought. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Thomas was the first to speak. His voice was firm but not loud. "What are you doing here?" Nita's body shook. Fear rushed through her, sharp and sudden. She dropped the cloth and the vegetables rolled onto the ground. She raised her hand slowly, showing she meant no harm. Her eyes stayed low, not from weakness but from respect and fear mixed together. "I was hungry," she said softly. Her voice was rough from thirst. "I did not want trouble." Thomas looked at the vegetables on the ground, then back at her. He had worked hard for that garden. He depended on it to survive. Anger rose in his chest, but it was quickly joined by something else, surprise at how thin and weak the woman looked. Nita's clothes were worn and torn from long travel. Her face was hollow, her eyes too large for her thin frame. This was not someone stealing for greed. This was someone fighting to stay alive. Still, the situation was tense. Nita knew that words alone might not save her. Stories had been passed down about what could happen when people were caught crossing lines they were not welcome to cross. She felt her legs weaken, and she slowly lowered herself to her knees, not as a sign of surrender, but because her body could no longer hold her weight. "I will return it," she said quickly, gesturing to the food. "I swear, or I can work, I can help you, I can serve you if you spare my life." The words came from deep inside her, carried by fear and hope together. She was not asking for kindness. She was asking for a chance. Thomas did not answer right away. He studied her face, her posture, the way her hands shook. He had lived on the frontier long enough to know that survival was not simple. He had lost people too. He had gone hungry himself more than once. But trust was not easy in a land where danger could come from anywhere. The silence stretched. Nita's heart pounded. Every second felt like an hour. She waited for his decision, knowing that whatever he chose would change her life forever. The morning sun finally broke over the horizon, casting light across the garden. It touched the leaves, the soil, the two strangers standing between fear and fate. Birds began to sing somewhere in the distance, unaware of the quiet moment that held so much weight. Nita kept her eyes lowered, breathing slowly, trying not to faint. She had done all she could. Now her life rested in the hands of a man she did not know. And Thomas, standing there in the growing light, felt the world shift slightly. This was no longer just about stolen food. It was about choice, about what kind of man he would be in a land that often showed little mercy. The day had only just begun, but for both of them, everything was already changing. Thomas stood quietly, the early morning light falling across his face. He did not move closer, and he did not step away. He simply watched the woman kneeling in his garden, her shoulders shaking as she tried to stay steady. The vegetables lay on the ground between them, forgotten for the moment. The silence felt heavy, but it was not cruel. It was the kind of silence where decisions are made. Nita kept her eyes on the soil. Her heart beat fast, and her mouth felt dry. She had said the words that came from her deepest fear and hope. Now she could only wait. Every breath felt like a question with no answer yet. Thomas cleared his throat. "Stand up," he said, not harshly but not softly either. Nita hesitated. She feared sudden movement might anger him. Slowly, using her hands for support, she rose to her feet. Her legs felt weak, and for a moment she thought she might fall. She steadied herself and stood still, her hands held close to her body. "I won't take more," she said quickly. "I swear it, I just needed enough to live." Thomas nodded once. He believed her. It was clear she had not taken much. Anyone trying to steal for gain would have filled their arms and run. She had been careful, gentle with the plants, almost thankful. "Where are you from?" he asked. "From the south," Nita replied. "My people moved with the seasons, but the land changed. The animals left. The rain did not come." Thomas had heard stories like this before. Drought did not choose sides. It touched everyone, no matter where they came from. Still, old habits of distance and doubt were hard to break. "How long have you been alone?" he asked. Nita paused. The truth sat heavy in her chest. "Long enough that I stopped counting," she said quietly. "When you count days, hunger feels worse." Thomas looked away for a moment, toward the house behind him. He thought of his own mornings waking up alone, of meals eaten in silence. Loneliness wore many faces, but it always felt the same. He looked back at her. "You said you would work." "Yes," Nita said quickly. "I can dig. I can carry water. I can clean. I can cook what little there is. I know how to care for plants. I grew food with my family." Thomas studied her hands. They were rough, marked by hard work, not soft like someone unused to labor. He believed she knew what she was saying. "And if I say no?" he asked. Nita swallowed. "Then I will leave," she said. I will not return. I will not cause trouble. Her voice did not shake this time. She had accepted that answer might not go her way. Still, her eyes held a quiet hope. Thomas exhaled slowly. He felt torn. Helping her would bring risk. Letting her go would bring guilt. The world already felt harsh enough. Did it need to be harsher? Come inside, he said finally. Nita blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Inside, she repeated. To the house, Thomas said. You look like you might fall over if you stand here much longer. She did not move right away. Are you sure? She asked. I said it, he replied. Carefully she followed him, keeping a respectful distance. The house was small but solid. The door creaked as Thomas opened it. Inside the air was cooler, carrying the simple smell of wood and dry herbs. Sit, he said, pointing to a chair. Nita lowered herself into it slowly. The moment she sat down, her body relaxed more than she expected. It had been so long since she had rested on something that was not the ground. Thomas went to a shelf and took down a small loaf of bread. He broke off a piece and placed it on the table along with a cup of water. Eat, he said. Nita stared at the bread. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. She hesitated, then looked up at him. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid the food might disappear. Each bite felt like warmth spreading through her chest. The water eased her dry throat. She did not rush. She knew better than to eat too fast after being hungry for so long. Thomas watched quietly. He felt something shift inside him. This was not charity alone. This was survival shared. When she finished, she sat back, her face looking slightly less pale. I will earn this, she said. Every bite. I believe you, Thomas replied. He sat across from her. You can stay for now, he said. We'll see how it goes. You work. I provide food and a place to sleep. No promises beyond that. Nita nodded. That is more than enough. There will be rules, he added. You respect my land. You do not take without asking. You stay honest. I agree, she said quickly. I have no reason to lie. Thomas stood up. You can start today, he said. There's water to carry and weeds to pull, nothing too heavy. Nita rose as well. I am ready. They stepped back outside together. The sun was higher now, warming the earth. Thomas handed her a small tool and showed her where to work. He did not stand over her. He returned to his own tasks, watching from a distance. Nita worked quietly but steadily. She moved with care, treating each plant gently. She knew how fragile food could be when the land was tired. Her movements were calm, practiced, and respectful. As the hours passed, Thomas noticed how she worked without complaint. She did not rest unless told to. When he brought her water, she thanked him each time. Not with empty words, but with sincerity. By midday, the garden looked better than it had in weeks. Weeds were gone. The soil was loosened. Plants stood freer under the sun. Thomas felt something he had not felt in a long time, relief. Not just because the work was done, but because the quiet house no longer felt quite so empty. When the sun reached its highest point, he called her to rest. They sat under the shade of a tree, eating a simple meal. This is only temporary, Thomas said, more to himself than to her. I understand, Nita replied. Temporary can still mean life. He looked at her then, really looked. She was no longer just the woman he caught in his garden. She was a person with strength, loss, and dignity. As the day wore on, an unspoken agreement settled between them. It was fragile, like a young plant just beginning to grow. But it was real. That night, as the sky darkened and the land cooled, Nita lay down in a small space Thomas had prepared for her. It was not much, but it was safe. She closed her eyes, her stomach full for the first time in many days. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Trust would take time. But for now, she was alive. And sometimes that was enough to begin again. The days began to pass in a quiet rhythm. Morning light came softly over the land, and work filled the hours until evening shadows stretched across the fields. Nita woke early each day, often before Thomas, and waited respectfully for instructions. At first, Thomas watched her closely, not out of unkindness but caution. Trust on the frontier was earned slowly, like water drawn from deep ground. Nita worked with steady focus. She cleared dry weeds, repaired broken fence posts, and learned the small habits of the land Thomas had shaped over years. She did not rush. She believed careful work lasted longer. When she spoke, it was only when needed. Silence did not trouble her, it was something she understood well. Thomas noticed the changes almost without realizing it. The garden looked healthier. The soil held better. Even the small plants that once struggled now stood straighter. Nita spoke to the land quietly as she worked, not with words meant to be heard, but with care shown through her hands. Thomas had never worked that way. He used effort and persistence. She used patience. At first, meals were quiet. They sat at the same table, eating simple food. Thomas would speak about the weather or the work ahead. Nita listened, nodding, answering briefly. She never complained. If food was small, she accepted it. If the day was long, she worked until the light faded. One afternoon, a strong wind came from the west, dry and sharp. Dust filled the air, stinging the eyes. Thomas worried for the plants. He moved quickly, trying to protect what he could. Nita saw his concern and acted without being told. She tied loose branches, secured coverings, and guided water where it would help most. By the time the wind passed, the damage was less than Thomas feared. He stood in the garden, breathing heavily, and looked at the work they had done together. "You know this land," he said quietly. Nita wiped her hands on her cloth. "All land speaks," she replied. "You only have to listen." Thomas thought about that later, long after the sun had set. That night, as they sat outside near a small fire, Thomas finally asked what he had avoided until now. "What happened to your family?" he said, his voice calm but careful. Nita stared into the fire. The flames moved slowly, like memories rising. She took a long breath. "Hunger," she said, "and sickness, and time. It takes what it wants." Thomas nodded. He did not press further. Some stories did not need every detail to be understood. Days later, Thomas noticed something else. Supplies near the edge of the land had been disturbed. Not stolen, but moved. Footprints marked the dirt, more than one set. He felt unease settle in his chest. The frontier held dangers beyond hunger. That evening, as they finished work, Nita stopped suddenly and listened. Her body stiffened. "What is it?" Thomas asked. "Others have been here," she said quietly. "Not today, but soon." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. "How do you know?" "The land tells me," she replied. "And the tracks?" He looked where she pointed. He had seen the signs but had not understood them. "Are they dangerous?" Nita hesitated. "They could be," she said. "Desperate people do desperate things." That night, sleep came slowly. Thomas lay awake, listening to every sound. Near midnight, Nita quietly stepped outside, moving like a shadow. She walked the edge of the land, careful and alert. She was not guarding for reward. She was guarding because survival had taught her that waiting too long could cost everything. Just before dawn, she returned and sat near the house. Thomas noticed her when he woke. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she said. "You didn't have to do that," he added. "I wanted to," she replied simply. That morning, Thomas saw her differently. Not as someone he had spared, but as someone who had chosen to stand beside him. Later that day, trouble came. Two men approached the land, rough and thin, eyes sharp with need. They did not greet Thomas politely. They looked at the garden, the house, the tools. "You've done well here," one of them said. "Maybe too well." Thomas stepped forward. "This is my land," he said. "Move along." The men laughed lightly, but it held no warmth. Nita stood behind Thomas, calm but ready. "You're alone," the second man said. "Would be easy to lose this place." Nita spoke then, her voice steady. "You are not welcome here." The men turned, surprised. One sneered. "And who are you?" "Someone who knows hunger," she replied, "and knows when not to push." The men studied her, sensing something they could not name. After a long moment, they stepped back. "Another time," one muttered. They left, dust rising behind them. Thomas let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Thank you," he said quietly. Nita nodded. "They will remember," she said, "but they will think twice." That evening, Thomas brought out a small bundle. Inside was a blanket, clean and warm. "For you," he said. "Nights are getting colder." Nita accepted it with care. "Thank you," she said. The word carried more weight now. As weeks passed, trust grew like a young tree, slow, steady, and fragile, but alive. Thomas no longer watched her every move. Nita no longer felt like she was walking on borrowed ground. One afternoon, Thomas showed her a small plot he had never managed to grow properly. "Nothing takes here," he said. Nita knelt, touched the soil, and smiled faintly. "It can," she said. "It only needs time." She began working the soil differently, mixing old leaves and adjusting water paths. Thomas watched, curious but hopeful. By the end of the week, small green shoots appeared. Thomas stared at them, disbelief clear on his face. "I tried for years," he said. Nita looked at the plants. "Sometimes the land waits for the right hands," she replied. That night, Thomas realized something important. This woman had not just brought labor into his life. She had brought knowledge, awareness, and balance. And Nita, lying under the stars with the blanket around her shoulders, felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not fear, not hunger, but the quiet beginning of belonging. The land was still hard. The future was still uncertain. But for the first time since everything had been taken from her, Nita was no longer only surviving. She was becoming part of something again. And both of them knew, though neither said it aloud, that whatever came next would test this fragile piece in ways they could not yet see. The change did not come all at once. It arrived slowly, like a cloud forming far away, easy to ignore at first. The days continued with work and quiet meals, but something unseen had begun to move around them. One morning, Thomas noticed the sky looked strange. Not dark, but heavy. The air felt thick and even the birds were quiet. Nita sensed it too. She paused in her work and looked toward the hills. "A storm is coming," she said. Thomas wiped his hands on his trousers. "We could use rain." "Yes," Nita replied, "but this one carries trouble." They worked quickly that day, securing tools and strengthening weak parts of the fence. The garden was doing better than ever, and Thomas felt proud of it. It was not just his work anymore. It felt shared. By afternoon, the wind picked up. Clouds rolled in fast, covering the sun. When the first drops fell, they were heavy and cold. Rain came hard, drumming against the ground and roof. Thomas and Nita took shelter inside the house. For hours, the storm raged. Rain poured like it wanted to wash everything away. Water crept toward the garden, threatening to flood the plants. Thomas grew restless. "If this keeps up, we'll lose half the crops," he said. Nita listened carefully to the sound of the rain. "We can guide the water," she said, "but we must go now." Thomas hesitated. The rain was strong. The ground was slippery. "It's dangerous." "So is losing the garden," she replied calmly. They stepped out together, rain soaking them instantly. Mud pulled at their boots. Working side by side, they dug small paths for the water to follow, leading it away from the roots. It was hard work, and the rain did not slow. More than once, Thomas slipped, and Nita helped steady him. At one point, a section of fence broke loose, dragged by rushing water. Thomas rushed forward without thinking. Nita shouted, warning him to be careful. He stopped just in time, realizing how close he had come to being hurt. "Listen to her," he told himself, and he did. By the time the rain slowed, both of them were exhausted. Their clothes were heavy with water and dirt, but the garden had survived. The plants stood bent but alive. Inside the house, Thomas built a small fire to dry the room. Nita sat close, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the rain fading felt like a quiet promise. "We saved it," Thomas said finally. Nita nodded. "Together." That word stayed with him. In the days after the storm, the land changed. The soil grew rich and dark. New growth appeared faster than ever before. The small plot Nita had worked on showed strong green leaves pushing upward. Thomas could hardly believe it, but good times rarely come alone. A few days later, Thomas found marks near the edge of the land again. Footprints, fresh ones. He told Nita that evening. She listened, her face serious. "They came back," she said. "Maybe the same men, maybe others." "What do we do?" Thomas asked. "We stay alert," she replied, "and we stand firm." That night Thomas did not sleep much. He kept thinking about how much he had to lose now, not just the land but the peace they had built. Near dawn, Nita woke him softly. "Someone is near," she whispered. Thomas sat up quickly. They listened. Faint sounds carried through the quiet morning, voices, low and careful. Thomas felt fear rise in him, but he kept his voice steady. "Stay inside," he said to Nita. She shook her head. "We face this together," she said. They stepped outside. Two figures stood near the fence, looking at the garden. One of them turned when he saw Thomas. "You again," the man said. "You're lucky." "This land is not for you," Thomas replied. The men laughed, but it sounded forced. They looked tired, worn by hunger and travel. Still, their eyes held a sharp edge. "We just want food," one said. "You have plenty." Nita stepped forward. "Take what you need from the wild," she said, "not from here." The men looked at her with surprise and doubt. "You protect his land now?" one asked. "I protect what is right," she answered. For a long moment no one moved. The air felt tight. Thomas's heart beat fast, but he stood his ground. He realized then how much Nita's presence gave him strength. He was no longer alone. Finally, one of the men stepped back. "Not worth it," he muttered. They left, disappearing into the land. Thomas let out a slow breath. "This won't be the last time," he said. "No," Nita agreed. "But each time they will remember." As days turned into weeks, their work deepened. They planned better water paths. They stored food carefully. They shared knowledge. Thomas taught Nita about tools and repairs. Nita taught Thomas how to read the land, how to feel changes before they came. The house felt warmer now, not just from fire, but from shared presence. Even silence felt different. It was no longer empty. One evening, as they ate, Thomas spoke quietly. "You don't have to stay," he said. "You've earned more than I first offered. You're free." Nita looked at him, surprised but calm. "I know," she said, "but freedom is more than leaving. Sometimes it is choosing where to stand." Thomas nodded. He respected that answer. Still, doubt crept in. Thomas wondered if he could truly protect this place. He worried that sooner or later something would break the balance. The land had tested them already. More tests would come. One afternoon, while working near the far fence, Thomas twisted his ankle badly. Pain shot through his leg and he fell. Nita rushed to his side. "Don't move," she said firmly. She helped him back to the house and treated the injury with care. For days, Thomas could not work. He grew frustrated, watching time pass while Nita handled everything. "You'll make it worse if you rush," she told him gently. Those days changed something important. Thomas saw how much he depended on her, not as help, but as a partner in survival. Nita worked from sunrise to sunset, keeping everything going without complaint. One night Thomas said softly, "I don't know what I would do without you now." Nita paused, then said, "You would survive. You always did, but together we live better." When Thomas finally healed enough to walk again, he stepped outside with new understanding. This place, this life, was no longer just his. The land had accepted Nita, and slowly Thomas had too. But beyond the hills, the world continued to move. Change was always near. And both of them felt it. Something bigger was coming, not just a storm, not just strangers, but a moment that would decide what this place truly meant to them. They could not yet see its shape. But they knew it would test their trust, their choices, and the quiet bond they had built through hunger, work, and shared ground. And when that moment came, neither of them would face it alone. The final test did not arrive with noise or force. It came quietly, the way true change often does. One morning, Thomas woke before sunrise and stepped outside. The air felt calm but different. The land looked settled, as if it had reached a decision of its own. Nita was already awake, kneeling near the small plot she had first brought back to life. The plants there were strong now, fuller than anywhere else in the garden. Thomas watched her for a moment without speaking. He realized how natural her presence had become. It no longer felt like she was staying on his land. It felt like she belonged to it. As the sun rose, a distant sound reached them, not threatening but unfamiliar. Voices, more than two. Thomas felt a slow tension return to his chest. Soon, three people appeared on the far path. They were not rough or hurried. They walked openly, hands visible, faces worn by travel. When they stopped near the fence, one of them raised a hand in greeting. Thomas stepped forward, cautious but calm. Nita stood beside him. "We're not here to take," the older man said. "We're looking for work or a place to trade." Thomas exchanged a glance with Nita. This was new. People rarely came asking honestly. "What kind of work?" Thomas asked. "Anything," the man replied. "We know land, we know tools, we're tired of running." Nita studied them carefully. She saw hunger but not desperation. She saw weariness but not threat. Thomas felt the weight of the moment. He could turn them away, protect what he had built, or he could take a risk, the same way he once had with Nita. "We don't have much," Thomas said slowly, "but we believe in fair work." "That's all we ask," the man replied. Thomas looked at Nita. She nodded slightly. "Stay for the day," Thomas said. "We'll see." That day changed everything. The work was shared. The visitors labored honestly, repairing a broken shed and clearing land farther out. They respected boundaries. They listened. When the day ended, Thomas offered them food. They accepted with gratitude, not greed. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Nita sat quietly beside the fire. Thomas joined her. "You didn't hesitate," he said. She smiled faintly. "Someone once did the same for me." Thomas thought about that for a long time. Over the next weeks, the land grew into something more than a single place of survival. It became a small center of shared effort. People passed through. Some stayed briefly. Some moved on. But the land was no longer isolated. Thomas and Nita worked as equals now. Decisions were shared. Plans were made together. When disagreements came, they talked through them calmly. One evening, Thomas brought out a small pouch. Inside were coins he had saved for years. "I want to pay you," he said, "properly." Nita looked at the coins, then back at him. "I don't measure my worth that way," she said gently, "but I will accept what helps me choose my future." Thomas nodded. "Then choose it freely." A few days later, Nita stood at the edge of the land, looking out toward the open distance. Thomas joined her. "I've been thinking," she said, "about who I am now." "And?" he asked. "I am no longer running," she said, "but I am not owned either." Thomas smiled slightly. "I never wanted to own anything but the work I put in." She looked at him. "Then we understand each other." That night they shared a quiet meal. No tension, no fear, just understanding. As the season turned, the land flourished. Crops grew strong. Water paths held firm. The place became known as fair and steady. People spoke of it with respect. Thomas often thought back to the morning he caught a starving woman in his garden. How small that moment had seemed at the time. How large it had become. Nita, walking through the fields, felt something she had never expected to feel again. Peace. Not the kind that comes from rest alone, but the kind that comes from dignity. One afternoon, she planted a tree near the house. Thomas watched. "What's that for?" he asked. "For the future," she replied. "For whoever comes next." Thomas helped her water it. Years later, people would tell stories about that place. Not of conflict or fear, but of choice. Of two strangers who met in hunger and built something lasting through trust. And Nita would be remembered not as the woman who stole, but as the woman who helped a land breathe again. Thomas would be remembered not as the man who spared her, but as the man who learned to stand beside her. Their story did not end in riches or ease. It ended in something quieter and stronger, a life reclaimed, a land shared, and a simple truth that endured.